Martin Ewell Tim Foster was part of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, and helped build the Sinai Military Railway, fancy making a train wait, while the station master writes a love letter. Thus does a young Suffolk railwayman write to his intended from the Sinai Desert during the Great War in this thrilling, enchanting and true story from 100 years ago. Like so many young men of his generation, Tim Foster, born in 1888 in Ipswich, found his quiet life suddenly interrupted by the war. Having enlisted in the Suffolks, he was sent out to the notorious bloodbath called Gallipoli. Here, in September 1915, he was spared the murderous expectorations of the Turkish machine guns when he caught typhoid. Martin Ewell Tim and Polly pictured on their wedding day in 1919. These flowers are badly pressed and looked much better waving in the wind on the sunny slopes of Mount Zion. Tim Foster, after being left for dead, by lucky chance he was pulled out of a pile of bodies by his brother and taken to a field hospital, shipped home and reunited with his family in Suffolk just in time for Christmas. Private Tim hoped, after recovering, to be posted to somewhere in England by early March 1916. However, he was back in the Near East, this time in Egypt. He wouldn't see his homeland again until May 1919. It is in Egypt where Tim Foster's story really begins. Tracks in the Sand, A Railwayman's War would be an extraordinary book just for its unique collection of photographs showing the construction of a military railway through the Holy Land, but it is much more than that. It is a love story from a century ago, brought vibrantly back to life through the pages of some 200 or more letters, which the country railwayman wrote to his young fiancée, Polly Pannell, of Brightlingsea. Martin Ewell. Sinai Military Railway was intended to run from Cairo to Jerusalem. Jerusalem Station pictured, like an Edwardian-style romance. The letters are written with a courtly fondness almost unknown today. Their tone might be that of Thomas Hardy, of the poet Eyre Houseman, echoing the words of a country lover to his lass. Could you but have been with me this evening, I would take you for a beautiful walk, for it's a glorious moonlit night. We could go along the Jericho Road, by the Virgin Mary's tomb, through the Garden of Gethsemane and back through Siloam. When he first arrived in Egypt with the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, Tim Foster and his comrades were charged with building a light railway from Suez to the trenches. Soon, though, came a larger and far more important project, the building of the Sinai Military Railway, intended to run from Cairo all the way to Jerusalem. This project became a race against time and against the Turks, who were building their own railway. He who finished first would win the war. As a piece of half-forgotten military history and an account of British railway engineering, the story is engaging enough. But running through it, like a silver through the desert, are these love letters. Tim Foster, however, does not stint on his descriptions of the daily hardships. These are rough times out here. The grub is hardtack, the biscuits are very hard, and the bully is stewed in its tin by the heat of the sun. Dust flows all day and smothers everything. Every mouthful is sprinkled with dust and flies, nor does he hold back from the passion he feels for his intended back in Blighty. When he finally returns, he promises, we must meet all alone, all on our own, for it will take us half an hour to recover from our first embraces, and then we shall want another half hour in which to compose ourselves. The slog from Cairo to Jerusalem continues, a Herculean task involving British soldiers and railway engineers augmented by locally recruited labour. The bonus with Tracks in the Sand is that Tim took a camera out to Egypt with him. Ingeniously he developed the films himself, using sunlight and canal water. Monday, July 31, 2017. Royal Mail's new set of stamps they are releasing marking the centenary of each year of the First World War. The hundreds of pictures he took attest to the terrain, the size of the task and the tenacity of the workforce. Glancing at the project as a whole, it strikes you that England seems no longer to turn out men of this caliber. The century-old photos feature landscapes of the biblical terrain in which Tim found himself. There are pictures of camels, men and railway bridges under construction. There's an assortment of steam engines purloined from his homeland for military use in the desert. One shot depicts crowds of local laborers, naked, awaiting a dip in a primitive delousing tank which will rid them of scabies, lice and other nasties prior to their joining the workforce. Their clothes meanwhile were cleaned, utilizing steam harnessed from one of the railway engines. It's probable that the delousing tank contained chemicals which simply wouldn't be permitted nowadays. Martin Ewell Tim Foster became Brightlingsea's station master after returning from the war in 1919. Our Suffolk lad, who was soon to become Jerusalem's first British station master, sat in the stifling heat of his railway shed, plotting his next tasks and writing love letters in stolen minutes to his beloved Polly. The excitement which spills from his letters as the military railway advances across Palestine is palpable. This morning I had the most interesting journey of my life, through the mountains of Jerusalem. It was a wonderful ride, great giants the mountains are, and on the very tip-top of one, I saw the tomb of Samson. In October 1917, Polly sends Tim some pressed autumn leaves to remind him of his homeland. In April of 1918, he reciprocates by sending her some pressed flowers which he has picked. These are badly pressed and looked much better waving in the wind on the sunny slopes of Mount Zion. This, we must remember, is a young Englishman traveling through the Holy Land 100 years ago. At a time when most countrymen of his age rarely left their homeland at all. To have walked in the land of Jesus, his senses heightened by his wartime experiences, must have been almost overwhelming for him at times, even though they didn't marry until Tim returned to England in 1919. In his letters he often refers to Polly as little wife or wife mine. It seems to be a device which he used to remind himself that despite the momentous circumstances in which he found himself, one day he would return to the reality of the life and the love waiting for him at home. An example is a midnight letter from Jerusalem in 1918. Beloved, the chimes on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre have just struck 12. Little woman, I should like you to be here with me and hear them. I always want you to share experiences with me. I want my life to be yours and yours mine. Typically, the letter ends, God bless you little wife mine. Your man. The textural and pictorial riches within Tracks in the Sand are sometimes difficult to adequately portray here. Occasional vignettes of life during wartime England a century ago are also fascinating. Included here are two of Polly's own recollections. 2 afternoons a week, my sisters and I went to the manor house to make bandages and operation socks under the direction of Mrs. Napier, wife of Admiral Napier in command of the Navy lads in Brightlingsea. And so, the war continued. My time taken up with Mary, writing daily letters to Tim and helping twice a week at the Naval Hospital in the disused railway refreshment rooms in Brightlingsea. When he finally returned home in May 1919, Tim, now a lance corporal in the Royal Engineers, married Polly and eventually becoming Brightlingsea station master. He in October 1956, age of 68, Tracks in the Sand, in its entirety, has been painstakingly assembled by the East Anglian artist James Dodds and his wife Catherine. They have transcribed into print their author's faded pencil-written letters, at the same time as restoring Tim Foster's photographs. It has been a long labor of love. Friday, November 10, 2017, jubilant crowds in New York celebrating the Allied forces' victory. Tim, who was James's maternal grandfather, shortly before he was born. The love letters to his wife and the cigar boxes of tiny photographic negatives, along with rail timetables, tickets, adverts and other cuttings, have waited a century for the literary rehydration, in a multifaceted publication. Here is history seen through the eyes of a quiet, capable East Anglian who strode confidently if wide-eyed into the yawning maw of the 20th century. Tracks in the Sand, A Railwayman's War is published by Jardine Press.